Teresa Walker from the AP. Shout out Nikki Lattarulo for hooking us up with you, Teresa. How you doing today?
I am doing good and happy to join you guys. I know that things went a little, we were going to try to do this last week, but sometimes things work out for the best. It was nice to see Aditi there at the end, so love her. So obviously you have great taste in guests.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we love Aditi, and we're excited about having you on. First of all, I know you know Mary Kay Cabot. You have been referred to as the Mary Kay of Nashville. Is that a fair comparison? Like Mary Kay has everything on lockdown here in Cleveland.
Well, I'm state sports editor for AP here in Nashville, and Mike Vrabel has given me the first question, since his first season.
Wow.
In fact, Teron Davenport of ESPN tried to, when they introduced the new GM, Rand Carthon, on Friday, Teron tried to go in with a quick question, and Mike kind of stopped and, wait a minute, Teresa.
I love it.
Even on the red carpet at the NFL Honor Show last year in LA, he stopped and a TV camera was set up beside me and they started to ask something. He goes, no, back home, Teresa gets the first question. So
I love it.
I'll say yes.
I've known Mike for a long time. That is a very Mike Vrabel thing to do. That's one of the reasons we love him so much. So Teresa, obviously we're having you on because we want to get your insight on our new offensive coordinator. We know that you've worked closely with Jim. What'd I say?
Offensive.
Defensive
He's calling
coordinator,
the offense.
Jim Schwartz.
Issues here, but.
Yeah, I have offensive. I have dreams of our offense exploding next year, but I also have dreams of our defense taking a huge step forward because they were not good last year. And Schwartz obviously is a guy that you know well. You've covered him during two different stints in Nashville. What can you tell us about him both as a coach and as a person?
Well, as a person, he's very detailed. I mean, when the Titans made their run to the '99 Super Bowl, he was a position coach at the time, and they just credited him for being incredibly prepared and having them ready to play. And then he was defensive coordinator, and they put together some really great defenses under Jim Schwartz, and they were so good. That's what got him his stint as a head coach in the NFL. And it was a little weird the last 2 years. We did not get a chance to talk to Jim. I mean, because of his senior defensive assistant title, we were told that league rules allowed them to not let him talk to us. So it was more like, hi, Jim. But having covered him for so long, it was easy to see his fingerprints on this defense. Shane Bowen, was a first-time defensive coordinator, and the year before Jim arrived, they were dead last in the NFL on third down conversions. I mean, an NFL team hadn't been so bad in decades, and they were giving up over 51% on third down conversions. He comes in, and you could see a more aggressive style. Now a lot of times, teams love to be able to get pressure with just their front four. When you see them start mixing in some of those blitzes and things like that, sending in a cornerback or, sending somebody else to add an extra guy, that felt like the Jim Schwartz effect. He can be very aggressive. His defenses are known for getting after the quarterback. He did that when he was in Philly. He did that here in Tennessee, and their sack numbers went up. The only reason that they didn't do better this year, the pass rusher, Harold Landry, before the season started, to a torn ACL. Bud Dupree, the guy who was their big free agent signee 2 off seasons ago, he was limited by injury again this season. But you could see that aggressive philosophy. So, I'm thinking Myles Garrett should be very happy to have Jim Schwartz as the new DC there, because he's gonna give him help to get better ways and have more chances to get to the quarterback.
It's interesting you say that, because I think that's exactly why Jim's here. That's why he got the job over Brian Flores and everyone else, was Myles Garrett and using him in this defense. But I wanted to ask you something a little bit different than that. I assume that they hid him from you guys because of the optics of the whole thing. But if everyone loves him and he is such highly regarded, why not just hire him as a defensive coordinator?
Well, right. I mean, because they hired Jim after, Shane Bowen kind of twisted in the wind for a year. He was the outside linebackers coach, yet he was talking to us kind of as defensive coordinator the year before they brought in Jim. Then Mike Vrabel gave him the official title as defensive coordinator, young defensive coordinator, first-time DC, and then they hired Jim Schwartz and announced him as that senior assistant defensive coach, so kind of like the, shadow there in the background, Jim, when he talked last week, he was kind of there to give advice, feedback, bounce around from position group to position group, and just, kind of be that eye in the sky, so to speak, that voice of experience, to help Shane, learn on the job, grow in his position, and better find his footing, I guess, while being that kind of sage voice of experience. So it was a very unusual situation, and honestly, it feels like that's why they didn't let Jim talk, because they were trying to make sure that Shane kind of grew into that position, and this defense, they were second best year in franchise history against the run. Of course, now they were last in the NFL against the pass because they were having trouble generating the pass rush, like I mentioned, because of the injuries. And Jeffrey Simmons, he told reporters after the loss in Jacksonville, he was shooting up an ankle every week just to be able to play to finish the season, and he's a two-time Pro Bowler. So, but I think that was more the reason. I mean, absolutely, he could have been their defensive coordinator, but Mike Vrabel was trying to, grow a younger coach that he had worked with in Houston in Shane Bowen.
Teresa, when you look at Myles Garrett and what Jim Schwartz has done to generate the most pressure from the defensive line, defensive tackles have been a giant part of his scheme. You look at Albert Haynesworth, Marcel Darius, Fletcher Cox, Jeffrey Simmons. They've all had tremendous success under him. The Browns this past season at defensive tackle was arguably their weakest position, the one they need to address the most this offseason. In your opinion, does Schwartz have the ability to up any defensive tackle to play at a much higher rate, or is that a position they need to get much better talent at to maximize what Schwartz wants to do defensively?
Better talent using a top draft pick certainly would help. But look at Teair Tart. He was an undrafted player for the Titans, and he had an incredible season this year for them. And, has been very productive despite being a guy who nobody took in the draft. So he can work with talent and bring talent out of guys who aren't high draft picks. And so, but if you give him somebody who is a top draft pick, like you mentioned, Albert Haynesworth and Jeffrey Simmons, both first-round picks, he can make them from something really good into something great.
Teresa, do you think there might be a player or two or maybe three on the defensive side of the ball that have the ability to move that might want to follow him here to Cleveland? Because there are some spots, obviously, on that defensive line that need filled.
Well, that's the thing. The Titans are over the salary cap right now, and they've got to clear some space, right? Without a doubt. And Bud Dupree, an outside linebacker, a guy who, the last 2 years, because they signed him coming off a torn ACL that he tore in December, and they signed him in March. One of the reasons the last GM was fired in December is, you can't gamble so much on guys that are coming off of injuries. Well, if he has his whole offseason to get healthy, he might be a cap cut for the Titans that somebody might, could look at. They're not letting Jeffrey Simmons go. I mean, after the A.J. Brown debacle and trading him away,
Wow.
I think we would all be stunned in Nashville to see them not find a way to lock up Jeffrey Simmons at some point this year. But Naquan Jones is a undrafted guy. Daquan Jones, I'm not sure of his status, but he's an interior guy who went from Nashville to Buffalo and has had some good success there. So here's the thing: there's a lot. He's coached a lot of linemen, and guess what? They know what they're going to get when they're working with Jim Schwartz.
What do they get? We've heard he's kind of no nonsense, very detail oriented. We've heard that from a lot of different players, coaches, media members that we had on the show in telling us about that, about his style. But were you even able to see him in the building and around the team much if they were kind of trying to keep him out of the way, particularly of cameras?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those fun things. It's like, okay, you got to stay in this hallway for 3 more minutes before you can go out. And then Jim would usually be one of the last people to go out. So I did get to say, we got to say hi to him. I mean, shoot, I've covered him, since the 90s. So, and dealt with him and had some good, conversations. At one point, he took issue with me pointing out that, pointing out that his defense was struggling. He's like, listen, we're struggling in this specific category. We're not, it's not like we're bad across the board. And so, yeah, he helped teach me. It's like, be specific in what I'm pointing out. They were, and then I started looking at the overall stats, and it's like, yeah, he had a great point. They were good in some areas. It's just that there was one area where they were really bad that one year. And he brings that, like I said, he was rotating to the different position groups because, he's been around defenses for so much of his career, and linebackers at one point. I mean, shoot, he started his career off in Cleveland under Belichick way back in the day.
Right.
So, he's got experience. So he knows how to go around. And I'll say this, over these last 2 years, while, he didn't talk, officially to us, he was talking to the different groups and the different positions and just providing that kind of extra eye in the sky. Sometimes when you're right up against something, it can be tough to, see that, the forest for the tree. And I think that was what he brought to them specifically over the last couple of years.
So getting back to what you said earlier, I agree with it, the Myles Garrett point. How can he get the most out of Myles? I think all of us who watch Myles game in and game out think that there's another level there. And he's obviously a wonderful player, but there's more in there that the Browns haven't gotten out of him yet. How does Jim get that out of him?
By giving him help on the rest of the line and finding guys, putting them in position so that they're getting some pressures. And occasionally, I mean, let's face it, how many times has Garrett found himself double teamed there, right? So, when you're able to, and that'll be, who they bring in to help at defensive tackle, but he'll be able to find some ways, scheme up some ways to find, to get him some more one-on-ones and get him into some space to go after the quarterback. And I think that's the area that will help him. He's going to have some more room to operate. And when you've got that, when you're Myles Garrett, it's going to help.
Does he get creative in how he lines guys up? Because one of the things that kind of annoyed us this year was it didn't look like they mixed. Every once in a while, they'd line up Myles and Jadeveon Clowney next to each other. But for the most part, you knew exactly where Myles was going to be, it felt like, in all the formations. Does Jim mix things up a little bit more, or is it pretty traditional and standard?
There have been times where he keeps them in spots, but yes, there's been times where he'll flip on the other sides. I mean, Jeffrey Simmons is a guy that, listed originally as defensive tackle, but, he would move out to end on occasion and flip around. And they definitely, the last couple of years, at least a year ago when Harold Landry was healthy, they would flip him and Bud Dupree on occasion. And so, yeah, when you move guys around, I mean, hey, let's face it, it helps to keep people off guard. And when you're on the clock and you're trying to get lined up and get the ball snapped, and you have to suddenly look up and you say, wait a minute, he's not where he usually is, that helps a defense. So, and yeah, Jim has done that. I mean, Albert Haynesworth would, move around on occasion. And, it definitely helps when you can move a top guy a little bit just to make them think, because when you get somebody thinking, that's when you can catch them off guard.
Teresa, this is a little off topic with Jim Schwartz, but let's say hypothetically Ohio State offered Mike Vrabel the head coaching job. Is there any chance you could see him taking that?
I'm going to say no for this reason. He's been a pro guy his entire career. And guys, I've dealt with this question back when Jeff Fisher was, anytime the Southern Cal job would come up, his alma mater, people would say, Jeff Fisher, ooh, he's going to go back to his alma mater. When Mike Munchak for 3 years was the coach here and Penn State, had an opening, it's like, ooh, Mike Munchak is going to go back to Ohio State. Mike Vrabel is a guy that while, he gets along, his son, one of his young sons has hung around the team most of this year. He's a baseball player and goes to a community college, just outside of Nashville. But he has literally been a pro guy from the time he was drafted by the Steelers. He spent that very brief time, getting into coaching at Ohio State. But once he got his feet wet on the coaching side, He went to the NFL, and he's been in the NFL ever since. And guys, I'll just say this. The Titans ownership, led by Amy Adams-Strunk, I don't think they're going to, it's tougher to get out of NFL contracts, right? Unless you're Urban Meyer. And they want to show you the door. But the Titans know what they've got in Mike Vrabel. They're not letting him go. And he just seems like the kind of fit that this is where he works best. He's a guy that, he treats these guys like men and holds them accountable like men. It's different when you suddenly, to go back to college, now have to deal with the transfer portal where you're literally recruiting guys every day. I just don't see that being something Mike Vrabel wants to deal with.
Teresa, thank you very much. Great information. We appreciate it. Thanks for coming on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show.
Thanks, Teresa.
My pleasure, and happy to join you all.
Absolutely. Really good insight. And you know what? The best point that she made on Mike was the last point, because I've known Mike for 30 years. He is a man's man. Mm-hmm. He suffers no fools.
College is not the place for him.
College,
say no more. That's it.
As much as I used to think that Mike would end his career in Columbus as coach of the Buckeyes, that last point that she made, I think, is the best point in the conversation.